Hi there, I'm Davio, your favorite podcast host. I'm here with Pieter Buteneers, CTO and co-founder at ML Legal, and we're going to talk a bit more about his endeavors so far and what he's doing with ML Legal. Hey Pieter, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing great, actually.
You survived traffic?
I did survive traffic. I made a massive detour through the fields, but it worked out fine.
Nice. You can.
But thanks to AI, they found me an interesting route to follow.
Long live Waze. So as I mentioned in the intro, it's not your first venture you're working on right now. You've been doing a few other things in the past.
Yeah, I must say I tried a couple of things before I found something that was successful. But yeah, the first real successful thing was Chatlayer, which is a bot platform. So basically a platform on which you can build chatbots and in the end also voice bots. And the idea was in the beginning to have like a very broad general platform where large corporations can build chatbot solutions quite easily. And it really started out of the frustration of how many bad chatbots were out there back then. Like those bots don't understand or they don't really work. And that was
back
really,
then, so we're talking about?
That's 2019. It started more or less in 2018, but really in 2019.
Yeah. That was still when bots were long lists of question answers, and then you had to figure out what's the intent, and then you matched the right answer to that intent.
And the trick was to have all the intents in place. But obviously, once you have an intent, you need like at least 20, preferably 100 or 200 training examples for that intent, and that was a lot of work back then. So we started experimenting with transformers very early on. And we discovered actually that you had transformers that were language agnostic. So it would be...
And you mean experimenting with what was out there? Like, I don't know, was BERT already...
BERT was there. So that was one of the first, proper transformers out there, right? But BERT was quite limited compared to the models that we were using before, LSTMs with word embeddings. It didn't perform as well. But the newer versions of BERT, so XLM Roberta was the one that we ended up using a lot. There we noticed that we could really make a difference. And on multiple levels. So we first discovered that you had these cross-lingual or language agnostic models. So you could train a bot to understand English. But given that we live in Belgium, it's very important that we support multiple languages for these chatbots. Our clients were, large telco players like Proximus or big banks like Belfius Bank or insurance players like AG Insurance. They had clients all over the country, and often their bots had to support 4 languages, not only Dutch and French, but also German and English. But they had just one team building the bot, right? So usually that team would speak Dutch or French or no matter what. But then translating the bot was a lot of work, and the quality went down dramatically going from one language to another. And using these language agnostic models, we discovered that, actually we could do 80% of the work with just one language, and then only very specific examples like expressions in languages had to be added in other languages.
Because if you train it in French, it improved in Dutch anyways.
Yeah, indeed. That was the general idea. And then our platform really supported like iterative learning in the sense that you could find questions that were asked that were not properly classified. You could add them as examples so that iteratively the bot improved a lot. And this allowed these platforms to have like very large bots that performed really well. So eventually, I think it's still the most used chatbot is Billy from bol.com, so the big Amazon competitor from the Netherlands. Their bot used to run on another platform, but they had a very hard time maintaining it and getting it to work. And they wanted to basically have a platform that allowed them to do the maintenance themselves on the one hand, and on the other hand, move into the French-speaking part of Belgium with their Dutch-speaking bot. So that's basically where we came into play, and they adopted this bot. And now, the entire bol.com chatbot called Billy runs on the Chatlayer platform.
But so you've AI is going pretty fast. We've had then BERT, then you used an adopted version of it to make that possible. Now we're into LLMs, where you could say, the whole chatbot thing of the past is of the past.
Yeah, it is for sure. Yeah.
How do you look at that? And
yeah, that market is completely changing. Like back then, with LSTMs, like pre-transformers, you would need like 20 to a few hundred examples. Then with transformers, you still needed quite a few, but we found a trick that with just 1 to 5 examples, you already had a very good result. But yeah, nowadays you can often do it without any example, right? You can just say, okay, this is the information that you have. Based on the information, answer any question that the user has.
But what you could argue is that now you have a chance of it going out of control.
Off the rails, for sure. Yeah.
Where the advantage of the old way was you actually, if it's not in the vocabulary or in the answers, it just didn't answer.
And that's why you see that most large corporations still stick to the Chatlayer way of doing things, where you have a very structured question-answer setup. And only, more experimental players try to move into having chatbots that run on technology like ChatGPT. But it doesn't mean that it is impossible. It's just if you do it the wrong way, you can get hallucinations. It might start talking about your competitors or give you the wrong information. Those things happen, right? There's this example where Air Canada, the chatbot they had, said that some user could get their money back. That person was happy, of course, but then in the end they said, Air Canada said, well, sorry, you're not getting your money back. This is not following the rules. How it goes in the US, obviously, they sued each other. And in the end, Air Canada had to pay because the bot is considered as an integral part of the company. So yes, there are these examples where it goes south, but it's often when this technology was adopted without paying proper attention to the potential pitfalls, right? Like hallucinations, like just coming up with, random answers, or maybe talking about competitors. But you can check that, you can control that, right? There are ways how you can guide the bot in the right direction and put checks and balances in place.
Yep. So that's Chatlayer, but you've sold that?
Yes, indeed.
How did that go?
Yeah, so actually we at the time we were actually in the beginning phase of entering the Netherlands. So we were already talking to bol.com at that stage. We were market leader in Belgium. We had the largest insurance player in Luxembourg as our client. So in Luxembourg, we're also pretty settled. And we were actually raising capital to grow internationally. We just wanted to raise capital and grow really fast. But what you need to grow internationally is an international sales network. And there are two options. Either you raise capital and you build it out yourself, or you piggyback on a larger player. And through our funding process, there were actually 3 companies that were interested in acquiring Chatlayer. And one of them was Sinch. And luckily, Sinch was the one that offered the biggest international network. They also did us the best offer in the end, because for them, the return on investment was just bigger, right? Because they could leverage that technology worldwide. So in the end, we decided to just piggyback on their sales network and to grow internationally, which really worked, right? In the end, the technology that we created is actually being used by players like AT&T for chatbots, and even some of these satellite-supported chatbots that Apple offers in iPhones in the US is linked to the Chatlayer platform.
And so you got it sold to Sinch. You got that international sales network. They did a hefty investment, and then LLMs came up. How did that feel?
So to be honest, when the LLMs came about, I was sort of moving on the way out of Sinch, right? I was already starting a new venture, but yeah, it came in as a shock. Like Sinch doesn't sound like a known tech company, but they're quite big.
What is quite big?
Well, they're 4,500 people, but they have multi-billion-dollar revenue, right? They just
and they're located in which country?
they're a Swedish player, but they're actually the largest player in sending text messages from a company to a user. So if you get a one-time password from Google or Microsoft, it's very likely that that message has been sent over the Sinch network. And they're basically the largest competitor of Twilio. So on paper, they're larger than Twilio, but Twilio has way better marketing, is much more liked by the developers. So yeah, they're internationally active. Their main market is in the US. And yeah, having that to leverage, to piggyback on, that was interesting. But what we noticed is that their clients in the beginning preferred the fixed structured approach of traditional chatbots still. And we could leverage these LLMs to come up with more examples to better support them. But so that the building process became easier, but they still stick to
stay the same.
Yeah. That's the strategy that they approach. That's not the strategy that I would advise to startups at all. On the contrary, I think as startups you should.
Which is a nice bridge to what you're doing now, which is you're now in the sphere of LLMs and how will that? But so you're now into a specific niche, but that's not how you started. So
No.
You went
Absolutely
from ML
not.
Legal, and I've heard you even had a few other ideas in between.
Yeah, for sure. So basically, after my stay at Sinch, I got tired. I had another startup in the energy sector in between. But then my co-founder Rick, he stayed at Sinch a bit longer. And what we both did.
Co-founder at Chatlayer and now co-founder at ML Legal.
Yes, indeed. But what is interesting is actually at Sinch. The first thing that we did was sell our own company to Sinch. So that was what we went through a legal due diligence process. That was interesting for us to see as a seller. What does that entail? What happens? And then my co-founder was mainly responsible for the whole buy and build setup at Sinch, because they bought a lot of companies and they integrated all the technology into one big thing, often on top of the Chatlayer platform. So he encountered a lot of M&A going on at Sinch. And yeah, after 4 years, he was also tired. He wanted to be an entrepreneur again. And given that track record, that history, it's actually pretty weird that we tried something else than ML Legal in the beginning. Because we set out in the beginning with a company called Structize, so Structize AI.
Sounds like something in construction or so?
Yeah, it sounds like, it's a horrible name, to be honest. Like a lot of our customers pronounce it as Structurize or something like that. They couldn't find it online. It was the worst name that we ever picked, but for lack of a better one, we stuck to it for a while. And our idea was that,
so and how what did you, if you started with it? Structize?
Yeah.
If you started with it, what was the initial idea?
The initial idea is that it's very hard to get an LLM to produce a structured output. So that you put
structured output, you mean like a JSON or a tab or an table
Excel or
whatever.
Something that you can put in a database, regardless, or that you can integrate in code. And it's back then, especially, it was pretty tricky to get like a reliable. That's a year ago, right?
A year ago.
A lot has changed in a year. It's crazy how it goes these days. But yeah, a year ago, it was very hard to get that going and to do that reliably.
Maybe if you can challenge, it wasn't hard to do it once, but to do it consistently.
Yes,
I would agree.
Indeed, for sure.
Just having a table is not the hard part, or having it spit out a JSON is also not hard. But
no.
then
but the JSON
do it consistently on a high level, that's something else.
Yeah, so you will get a different JSON every time, a different JSON structure or a different table structure. So you don't really have something that fits a database. A database is something very rigid. Like it really needs you to follow a predefined structure. So our offering was like, okay, give us any text and we extract information from it in a predefined structure so that you can use it either in your database, in your code, in automation tools like Zapier.
Very horizontal.
Very horizontal again.
Any industry, any basically just we go from un to structured.
Yeah,
from
indeed.
unstructured to
And
structured.
and the even though it was very broad and general from the get-go, the idea was at least we have a baseline to experiment with in multiple markets. And that's actually what we did. We tried a bunch of markets. We always looked for a customer. So everything that we did was a paid endeavor, right? We were always creating actual value for a customer that somebody wanted to pay for. And we tried a bunch of things. The first client was SNS Media. So they're the largest player behind machine learning conference.ai. So one of the largest machine learning conferences. But they have lots of conferences and lots of articles. One of their main problems was that, well, they had 30,000 articles and they didn't know what these articles were about. And having one person spend 5 minutes per article, it would take them more than a year to label all these articles.
So basically tagging articles,
Yeah,
adding
indeed.
metadata,
Yeah.
which helps you to search it
And actually for them, it was to support their recommender system. So based on, well, how recent is the article, obviously, but what's being said in the article and compared it to other articles that you have read, that is something that they couldn't do and that they really wanted to do. So we classified all their articles and we continue to classify still new articles that come in, and they use it in their recommender system to advise new content to their readers. And that was the first thing that we tried. And yeah, it was really based on what Andreessen Horowitz said in the beginning, like synth AI is going to be the new future because LLMs are really good at summarizing. If you let them just generate text, you can have hallucinations, but if you make it what you have shorter, more structured, there is potential there. In theory, they can do it really well. So we did that for media articles. Then we had a project in translation. So the problem is that you can outsource to translators, to human translators, but you need to validate how well they perform. And since it's much easier to build a critic, to get somebody to say like, okay, this is good or this is bad, we basically set out like, okay, let's make a critic for translations. So you have the input, the output, and then you have a bunch of criteria to check for, like, is this a good or a bad translation?
But then for language.
Yeah, for translations, specifically to quantify translations based on a bunch of criteria. And we did that for a client because they wanted to have that for their clients, so they're like a translation company. And we noticed that by doing that, we can actually use the feedback from the LLM to improve the translation. So you will get better translations than if you just translate them with ChatGPT. It's like a first step of a reasoning approach, what you see with the reasoning models, but where you predefine the reasoning steps. And that worked really well. We had our first client there and we tried to find multiple clients. But what we noticed is that it's a shrinking market, the translation business, which makes sense. But the main reason is that not because ChatGPT is doing more translations than DeepL a year ago. That's not the thing that's really breaking that industry. What's really changing that industry is that the content at the source is now generated in multiple languages, because ChatGPT is often used to generate a lot of this content, and from the source it's just generated in
the necessary language,
in 20 or more languages at once. So that market was shrinking. There was no money for this kind of solutions because, well, the human translated content has become so cheap because there's so many people losing their job, basically, that having an LLM in between that can offer like some middle ground, like better than standard translations, but still slightly below human quality translation, there was no place for something like that. So
you went from media to translation, but if I remember well, you said you did 7 kind of industries?
Yeah, let's count where we end up, whether it's 7, but yes. So the next one was order processing. So if you have basically lots of companies, and our first client was from Brazil, they received orders via mail. But it was always the client that decided what the structure was. Is it just in plain text in the email? Is it in a PDF because their CRM spits it out like that, or an Excel file or whatever? It will always come in a different format, but the information was usually there, but the format was always different. And even for a company like Brazil, having a human doing all the work and copying it from one place to another was really, really expensive. And automating it was actually cheaper, even though as a European company, you might think that you're expensive, but actually we were cheaper in automating that than they having a human sitting on top of it and doing that work. So we basically just extract the information from the order and put it in the order form where it needs to be, and then they just need to validate it and move on. And we noticed that we made a lot fewer errors than the human in this case. We're not error-free, but we had like hallucination checks and other checks in place. So we made a lot fewer errors, and we were way faster. Because from the moment the order came in, less than a minute later, the order form was filled out. So for them, it meant that they had a lot less time between the order coming in and delivering it to the customer. Their supply chain was more efficient. They had less stock. So in general, it was more than just helping the person doing the work being faster. It was also for their whole supply management a big difference.
It's kind of funny, actually, all the use cases that you're mentioning. I think we've done all of them as well, which is like how everything is, how you think you're doing things differently, but everything is very similar. And then at the same point, the interesting part for the project that we did, we basically in the end advised it would be better that you just force your clients to fill in an order form. That will be a lot cheaper.
That's even cheaper, yeah. But we could do it quite reliably. But yes, obviously, if they can follow a structure, that works better. But we had a first customer in Brazil, later on a second customer, much bigger customer. So we thought maybe in that direction there is something more, because you have, well, order forms, but then you have a whole supply chain optimization. But then it turned out that there's a startup here in Belgium called Hyperfox.
I was just going to say that, yeah.
And I ended up in their advisory board and really helped them forward with their AI. But yeah, they do the end-to-end supply chain optimization, and they're way better suited to do that than I was, because they are supply chain experts. So I just advised them, and we moved on to the next direction, and that was engineering firms. They had two separate problems. Is that you sometimes have like these consultancy firms that, in this case, it was a Swiss company, doing ventilation systems. And they often, they have one problem recurrently, is that they ask for offers from multiple companies. But yeah, comparing these offers, because one offer is cheaper here and more expensive there, and putting it nicely side by side is a tedious work. So that's one thing that we did for them. We made like an Excel add-in, and that way we can extract the information straight into Excel, and they could apply their formulas, and everything would roll out. So order form, the offer comparison. And then the other thing that we did for them is if you have, technical sheets about products, you might want to compare them on a bunch of features. But yeah, listing that is a lot of work. So we gave them a tool where they can simply create an Excel template, click a button, and we would automatically generate prompts and fill it out. And that worked reasonably well. So that was pretty interesting for us as well. But we tried to find other engineering firms, and also there it was very hard to get in, because it required much more customization than we liked. But since we had this Excel add-in, we thought like, well, maybe we can do something in finance. So we went to CFOs, because we knew from our time at Cinch. Like if you have to consolidate your annual accounts, well, it's a lot of work if you are across multiple countries. So we made some solutions there, and then we soon realized like, yeah, actually remember when we were doing these acquisitions, that's the place when you had to process a lot of data in a short amount of time. Maybe there's more value. So that's how we went from supporting CFOs to, well, in the direction of financial due diligence. And then we realized like, okay, the financial part is like in an entire due diligence process is like a day, 2 days of work, like 2 man days. But the whole legal process is weeks for multiple people, right? It's like man months. So then we realized that, okay, actually what we should have done from the beginning is this legal due diligence, which is odd given that the circle around, going back to actually where we were and thinking back to, well, when we were acquired, where we were saying like, what a messy process. Like it takes so much time. You actually have a person reading all these documents. Like I think we had 400 documents in our data room, and there are people reading them, and these are contracts of 20, 30, 60 pages, right? Reading them in detail, end to end. Yeah, it's an enormously tedious process, and we laughed at it back then already, and now we came back full circle, and we saw like okay, actually in this field, you have the Harveys, used to be Leia, now Legora, and LegalFly, but in this niche, there is actually no real player solving the problem really end to end.
And with niche, you mean M&A?
Legal M&A due diligence. Yes, you can do a lot with prompt engineering, but it requires a lot of work. You'll have to copy paste every document, or you can use tools like Harvey, but then even there, you still have to prompt engineer quite a bit to get the information out. And there is no solution that solves the problem really end to end with just a few clicks on the button. And what we saw with the clients that we were talking to, they were not interested in prompt engineering. They really didn't want to fine tune their prompts and get the best result. No, they
just want answers and get to work.
Indeed. And focus on the things where they add value.
Exactly.
And in legal due diligence, the most added value is, well, you find the issues that are there, but what do you do about them? And that's where lawyers really shine. It's like they figure out, like, is this issue something that's high risk for the buyer, or is it, well, on paper a high risk, but in practice it never occurs? And
so,
that's where they really shine. And how to deal with that? Like, how will you, if you find risks, how will you mitigate them? How will you make sure that if you buy the company, you don't end up with those risks in your portfolio?
So the interesting part is there's a few things, questions, things I'm hearing. So one, what you're saying is we've done a few verticals. We went away from the horizontal.
Yep.
That was on purpose? That was by accident?
No, that was really on purpose. Yes, we started with a horizontal platform because it allowed us to try a bunch of things.
To see
which we always said from the get-go, like, if we find our niche, we will go really deep.
And why was that important, finding a niche? Because I see right now there's, let's say in the AI space, there's happening a lot, and you have everyone is thinking, let's build our own RAG and implementation, and we'll build structize, basically. We'll do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a gazillion of those.
Well, the reason why it's important for us is that we made a mistake in the past. Like with Chatlayer, this was also a general bot platform. It was this Rolls-Royce kind of thing where you can build basically any bot. The most complex things, we would support it. But you will notice that only experts use that tool. And if you look at the value that you create, yes, for a few big players, you create a lot of value, but they still need a team of people working on it. It's not a...
But so what you're saying is, basically, if you go broad, you're not solving a problem end to end?
Yes, indeed.
So what you're also saying is AI is not smart enough to do that?
Well, not yet, in the sense that if you want an LLM to work really well, the best results you get if you create a good prompt. But what entails a good prompt is that you provide enough context.
Yeah, you have
in your prompt.
Proper structures, how you. it's not just context. It's about the proper questions, context, examples. All of that is now key.
Yeah.
But do you imagine? So that's because the LLMs are not smart enough.
Well,
do you imagine
actually,
that to change?
I don't think they're. The problem is that they're not smart enough. It's like you can have the smartest person in the room, but if he doesn't know your background information, it also won't work, right?
It's a bit like how we're describing it is as it's like onboarding someone in your company. You need to give them the same information.
Yeah.
What's your company? How do you work? What do we expect? What's your role? What's your responsibilities? And basically that's similar.
And it's very similar. So these LLMs are very smart, but you have to provide them with the necessary frame of reference, the necessary context, the necessary examples to do their job really well.
How do you, because then I see two things. One, if I hear that, I'm wondering, okay, why do we not make it a lot more intuitive to onboard LLMs? Because basically, prompt engineering is not 100% intuitive. That's a bit a gap you see also between people like, oh, let's just use LLMs and it will work because it's just how you talk to people. In reality, it's not the case. You need a certain structure and you need to be a proper prompt engineer to actually make it work. It's not just naively explaining it like you would explain to a person. But you could argue then that maybe if we think about that, how can we make it a lot easier to just explain like you do to a new colleague how this works, that we can train LLMs or onboard them a lot faster and more efficiently.
To be honest, that's what we tried with Structize as well. We had like automatic prompt generation in place. So we would generate a prompt. You would just write something and we would defer from the frame of reference how the prompt would look like. And yes, that works. You can actually get good results. But if you really want to nail a problem, and with legal due diligence, it's like really finding the needle in the haystack.
You can't afford to be wrong.
Indeed.
50%
You cannot wing it, right?
Exactly.
It needs to be really, really right. Mm-hmm. And for these kind of cases, you really need to set the frame of reference right. Mm-hmm. And even if these models get smarter, as long as they don't have the frame of reference, they will not figure this out. You see it also with the deep research models that are out there. The first thing that they do is ask you 5 to 10 questions to get the frame of reference.
There you're saying already they're asking questions. It's already a completely different setup, because now the hard task of ML Legal and actually all of the players which are in the application layer or in the last mile is now basically getting that domain knowledge really crisp in the prompt. And indeed. It might be how do we process the data as well a bit, but that's getting almost standardized. I'm seeing, but really that last part, getting that domain knowledge as crisp as possible in that prompt, that's basically the golden grail.
And if you look at legal due diligence, the difference between not having the last mile and having it, if you not have it, you still require a lot of human effort, because they check like a few hundred things in a data room of a few thousand documents quite often. If still for half of the things you still need to do the follow-up work and have to wait, then your process takes almost as long. So the added value is not there if you do it that way.
But let's flip it. That holy grail, if you get deep research, good example, you get that questions. What if you can get there? Because the thing is, if you have those questions and you have them, it's done well, and you end up with that proper holy grail prompt. That holy grail prompt becomes scalable, but you're actually scaling creating the initial prompt. Do you believe that will happen?
Well, it might improve, but again, even there, being in a niche really helps, because again, you can set the frame of reference. If you have 200 things that you need to check in a data room, so in all the documents from a company that's being acquired. If you have 200 things to check, and for those 200 things, you have 5 follow-up questions, you're still doing a lot of work. But if you can integrate the context and the frame of reference by default, the number of follow-up questions will be significantly less. So even there, even if you have a deep research model that performs much better, you still need to, in a standard way, answer a lot of questions unless you set that frame of reference really well. And that's why I believe even with better models that can actually interact, you don't want to have this intern that comes by and asks you questions every 5 minutes. No, you want this very capable junior and in the end senior that goes out, does the work, and then in the end comes back like, here, maybe I have some doubt. And you can only do that by setting the frame of reference. And setting the frame of reference works much better if you go really deep into a specific niche. So and
it's also the mode that you're creating there, which isn't very hard because it's not something. I'm assuming you have a good frame of reference right now, but that's something you're working on every time, getting feedback from clients and improving, which is the part which is very hard then just to copy for someone else, because
indeed. And it's that focus and that interaction with customers, and that will bring us to something that's even better than what we have today.
And how do you see, because on the one hand, so you're saying the evolution, I'm not worried that it will take over getting that insights, that really deep niche view. I'm not worried because it just very, very hard, basically. But on the other hand, if you could look at it from another way as well, which is, it might be that you actually take over more work of lawyers in the future, because you mentioned, estimating risks. It's also basically a mathematical thing. There's a lot of uncertainty in it.
Honestly,
but how do you see that?
It might sound...
You have the idea of the autonomous companies and all of that. How do you see that evolving?
It might sound as a mathematical thing, the estimating the risk, but what you see is actually the M&A business is much more a people's business than you think. So it's really feeling who is your customer, what is the risk appetite for that customer, how is the inner working of that company, how is the likelihood that they will run into that risk. And there's a lot of side information. So
what you're saying is there's a ton of information which is not written down, or it's
not accessible.
It's not accessible. Exactly. And it's something that we as people can feel, but you can't read it anywhere.
No,
it's in between the lines.
And this is what a senior lawyer, a partner at a law firm, learns over time by interacting with a client for a much longer period of time, or by interacting with multiple somewhat similar clients.
But so does that mean that you see like a gap between, because that's a bit a paradox then, in the sense you need that senior lawyer to feel that client because of out of experience, but at the same time, what I'm then hearing is for more junior people, it will be a lot harder to bring added value in the beginning.
Yes.
But you need to be junior to become senior.
But the thing is, if you talk to junior lawyers right now, they spend a lot of time just reading documents. And I've talked to many of them, they're smarter than that, right? There is a lot more value that they can add, but they just don't have the time to do it.
And how do you think about the fact that sometimes they say you need to do a bit of heavy lifting or just repetitive work just to build like a base layer in a certain industry? Like, how do you look at that?
Well, yes. Well,
you have the same argument in education, that they say a calculator, using it or not.
Yeah.
We have a calculator, so why would you use it? But then you have people saying you should actually do the mathematics just to understand the mechanics and build an intuition and be analytical.
Yeah.
The goal is not to be able to replace a calculator, but just to build that mind. How do you look at that?
Maybe I go a bit deeper into how our platform operates, and then you see that we still offer that. The difference is, basically, you enter a lot of documents into our platform, and then you tell the platform to check for a few hundred possible liabilities. And what we will then do is analyze every single...
And those liabilities, that's something which is something you added to your platform.
Indeed. And customers can add more, but we have a bunch that are built in
like standard.
And you check for those, and then what the system will do is actually start reading all the documents, looking for that needle in the haystack, right? Even if you hide a document in a wrong folder, we will find it.
We will find you.
Yeah, for sure. That's the idea, right? That's the promise that we have, because we don't work with a RAG, we don't work with a search engine. We actually analyze every single document looking for that needle in the haystack. Because that's the business of due diligence, right? You need to find that. And the end result is that we highlight where in the document a potential risk is. And then it's up to a lawyer to review that risk and rate it on, well, no risk at all, or in most cases, if we find something, low risk, medium risk, or high risk. And there
you end up with a prioritized list.
Yes, indeed. And there you still need that input. And that is something that not necessarily seniors have to do. Okay. As a junior lawyer, you can just dive in, you can see the document, you can read everything around that clause, figure out like, okay, is that an issue or not? And rate the risks. So, and there they can still have that practice to learn.
That learning. So that learning, it will be crucial then that there's maybe eventually even in your platform, a loop between the more junior people, the more senior people to say, okay, that risk was rated not on the right level I would estimate, and this is why, so that they can actually adopt to that new way of working.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because that is built in, right? So you as a you as a reviewer, you look at the documents, whether you're junior or senior actually doesn't matter. You give them a risk level. You can write some comments on each documents, and then you can send it off. Well, sort of, but you can send it off to a senior and say like, okay, I've reviewed this, I'm ready. Now it's up to the end responsible for this domain. It can be HR. You can have somebody that has HR expertise that then goes in and checks everything that has been done and gives another rubber stamp on top. And there you can have this back and forth.
Because the interesting thing is, the learning part is then, okay, I see a different risk because of this. That's built in the platform then.
Indeed. So basically, the idea to communicate is right there. So every document has, a chat conversation going on, basically, where you as a junior can write some comments and a senior can come in and write their own comments and go back and forth. So that
would mean then, if it works well, I haven't tested it, so I should test it. But I would assume then that they would learn a lot faster as well, because they
Indeed.
It's a bit like private tutoring almost.
And the time you generally waste on reading documents that have nothing to do with what you're looking for, that time is completely eliminated.
But that also means that you really need to have everyone on board in a new kind of process. It's not something you can say, well, let's give a new tool to an individual and review it. You need to have that workflow actually done well. Like we review, you get feedback, it boils back, and you involve the same people, the same than before, but in a different way.
Yeah, indeed. In an ideal scenario, you have that. But there are intermediate steps that you can do. We have some clients that are VCs or private equity players that just want to do a sniff test. They're not lawyers. They just want to, they get a company that comes in, they dump it in a data room, they click a few of our standard templates, they check them, we translate legalese to something they understand, and they see, okay, there are these issues, this is something I can or cannot live with. So if it's okay, high level, it's good, then they get a law firm involved to do the deep check. And that was for them a manual process before, and it saves them a lot of time. That's one thing. The other thing that you also see is that currently in legal due diligence, what often happens is that only the top 10 contracts are reviewed. Because if you have 1,000 customers, having a team of associates reading 1,000 contracts is too expensive. So they just say the top 10, and they only give guarantees on the top 10, and that's it.
It's an audit. It's just to use a sample test.
Indeed. Yeah. But what you can do is, put the 990 other contracts into our system, and you can get like a report on those. And a customer...
So your assurance is getting way higher at a lower cost.
Yeah. Indeed. And it's just a small additional cost, but you check, 99 times more data, right? So your assurances become way better, but that can be a first step. And then you can actually give, like in our platform, it ends up with a digital report that you can give back to the the client and the company that acquires another company. And there they can see, okay, what the issues are that we found. And you can actually go back straight to the document where the issue was. So for them, it's really easy to see, okay, these customers have a contract with a potential issue. The issue is this clause right here. They can go straight to that. And then...
And what if, being the devil's advocate, you miss something? And that how do you... Because I'm would estimate that it's still possible. Maybe you're not that likely, but being... if you're on the risk averse side, which is if you're a lawyer, that's basically what you need to do as a job. What if you miss something? First of all, how do you deal with it? What's liability for you as a company, or how does that work?
Just for reference, obviously humans reviewing contracts also miss some stuff.
Yeah, it's the same like with the self-driving cars. If you look at it, you people go berserk if there is an accident, but if you look at the statistics, it's safer. Point.
Indeed. And that's a bit the angle that we take, right? We will for sure make a difference in the sense that there will be a lot fewer things that we miss. But how do we guarantee that? And that's maybe an interesting trick that you guys can also use is basically the end goal is reducing the workload of the people using our platform. So it means that if you potentially miss something and they still need to go into the data room and start reading all the documents, you're not bringing the value. So what we do is we make our detection algorithms fairly sensitive in the sense that we bring up every document that has a potential risk. So you don't have to go into the data room.
So you're optimizing for recall and not for precision then?
Yeah, indeed. In the first step, we bring out everything, we label everything so you can go and review it. And then in the second step, we dive into the precision and make sure that we are more accurate.
But so your baseline, what you're bringing to customers is, can they actually be more productive? Point.
Yes.
And it's not about the assurance part, which is then
a bonus.
Bonus, exactly. But the part is the productivity of the people.
Yeah.
And that's also something you measure then?
Of course. I mean, and it's fairly easy to measure because usually during the diligence process, it's like 3 to 5 weeks with, depending on a team of 2 to 10 people working on it. Well, for a size of a kind of deal, they know how to estimate this. So we can see, okay, how much faster can they do a deal, or how much fewer resources did they need for that deal. And that's pretty easy to measure. And there you can see savings from 30% on the lower end to 50% or more on the higher end. And that's a big difference, right?
And how do you, because what you're doing is, and that's where basically the money is at, you're doing the end-to-end part.
Yep.
What we're seeing is that, so you have a gazillion startups doing that in their niche, one better chosen than the other. But you also have corporates, enterprise, investing a lot of it themselves. But what you're seeing is that it's very hard for them to see, okay, all those startups are doing it. Where do we invest? What should we leave out to the market? Because it's still a bit of a sandstorm, basically. It's still unclear how this will evolve. One thing is clear: if you go for it, you need to go for it end to end. You can't just do a POC because, or just the AI part, because that will not bring the value.
No,
it's actually everything around it that will bring you the value. So that means investment is typically higher than what you would expect, I would say, in the sense that with an LLM, you can do a POC for 10, 15, maybe 20K. But the end solution, which is robust and works well, you won't have that for 20K.
No, indeed. You have to go much further. And
so just to point that out, so that means that actually the investment is higher than what sometimes is expected, because the POC is cheap, but the actual solution is not.
Yeah.
And that you compare with the fact that there's a market going crazy of startups doing all those niche. I can understand that a lot of companies are like, whoa, what's happening? Where do we put our money? How do you see that? Have you noticed that?
For sure. You obviously, you see a lot of companies trying stuff internally. And yes, they usually go for the LLM approach, and then they see, okay, the LLM does something, that's nice. but then they ask other people in the company to use it, and then you see, oh, the adoption rate drops at that point. Because, well, these LLMs solve a part of the problem, but they are often not integrated into the workflow that is usually used. And with our platform, the approach that we took, and that's why we pick a niche, is that we can also support the entire workflow with a tool that even if you don't use our AI functionality, you still have productivity gain. And if you don't offer that part as a startup, you're not making the difference, right? The productivity gain has to be built in the standard solution, and the AI is the cherry on top that gives you...
Translate that to enterprise investments. Basically, that's also saying most of the things, stop doing it and only work on those processes, workflows that are super... that are your competitive edge, something which you can't find on the market and which others won't build. The rest, please ignore, because that's basically a waste of money and time.
Yeah, indeed. Whatever is unique to your enterprise, that is very unique to your business, is very hard for a startup to automate. Because
there you need to go all in, and the rest you need to ignore.
And the rest you ignore, and you try to buy off the shelf, right? Lots of companies used to have their own CRM system. Most companies now use Salesforce, HubSpot, and the other players, because they offer out-of-the-box solutions with way more features at a way lower price than you can build it yourself. That was different in the beginning, and I think we're still at a stage where... well, not every niche has been taken by a startup. And yes, you can still do a bunch of these things. But while you're doing that, it's a matter of time. So while you're doing that, always consider, like, can we do this maybe also for our competitors or other players in the market and spin this out as a potential startup? That's a different approach.
It's either the question, can we spin it out? Or to say you shouldn't do that, because if there's a market for it, sooner or later, there'll be a startup for it.
Yeah, there will be a startup for it. Yeah. And probably if you look well enough, you will find a startup. And the nice thing about startups is that you get a lot of value. The ones that function well give you awesome customer support, right? Because the only thing where you can differentiate as a startup with larger players in the field is this awesome support that you
white glove
give.
Approach. You need to,
And if you take a corporate approach and you don't offer it, well, you're dead, right? You're small, you don't have all the features, and if you don't do support, you're a risk. People won't use you. So if you pick out good startups, they will give you awesome support. And on the other hand, if you pay for what they offer, you actually sponsor them and they stay alive. And it's quite often way more interesting to just have a startup. Usually they're way cheaper than building it internally. Having them do it, you learn from that. And even if the startup defaults at some point, you learn what is important and what is not. And it's much easier to go to another player. And in the meantime, you have had that advantage. So as a company, you also learn a lot about that process, because those startups go to many players in the field and they learn the best practices all over the place, because startup founders are typically people that learn really fast and love to learn new stuff.
I hope.
I
know.
Because if you don't, then you don't get there, right?
How do you, because so you've went full circle, you found your niche. Basically, that's the process which you see a lot in the market. You found your niche. It's clear that you understand it well. I think you nailed it by the fact you need to focus on that workflow, really focusing on productivity gains. Now, looking a bit more into the future, we've already talked about the deep research part, but that's something where you say, okay, that's nice, it can help us, but it won't beat our moat. Now, how do you look at the entire concept? Because, let's say LLMs, we're already in the second phase. We had the first phase, which you could call the system 1 or associative thinking. If a cat has 9 lives, that's what an LLM is basically good at. But now we're entering the system 2, the slow thinking, Daniel Kahneman, the reasoning part, which promises to unlock a lot of new things again, driving us to the real agency, agents, autonomous AI, whatever you want to call it. Basically, they can take more out of our hands, more complex tasks, not just repetitive things, but also new paths to explore. How do you see that? First, maybe in a broader context, will it happen? Do you think it's a matter of time, or do you think it's a lot of marketing? And how will it materialize, and then maybe bring it back to Emma?
I think in the short term, and Anthropic is already alluding to it. They launched a new model not so long ago, but that is a standard model which will also do reasoning if you want to. So
they start integrating it.
Yeah, they started integrating it. OpenAI is already talking about it, that they're going that route.
GPT-5 will no longer be just system one. It will be everything integrated. And ditch the ugly list where you have to choose between the models.
Indeed. So that's, where we're going regardless. So this model will be capable of doing reasoning. But I think what the next step is that the model figures out by itself, have I reasoned enough? Because now you still have to give in reason for 10 iterations, 100 iterations. You have to specifically state how long it has to reason.
The time it can think, basically.
Yeah, indeed. And the more time you give it to think, the more you pay. Yeah. But it might, after one iteration...
There's a curve where it starts to saturate.
And it depends on the problem, right? For some problems, the curve is really steep, and just after 2 iterations, you're done. But for other problems, you need maybe 50 iterations to get there, and you don't know that beforehand. So what Anthropic claims that they're working on in a next release is that you can just say that the model can reason, but that the model figures out by itself how long it will reason. So,
which is then making more efficient use of inference time.
Indeed. And that's really where I think you're going, is that when you get an answer from ChatGPT right now, that answer is first reasoned on a bit by the model in the background, so that you get a much more refined, much better response. And I think that's the thing that's
why is it then so important that timing is optimized? Why not just think about everything for a long time?
Cost-wise. The only issue that you have there, and you see that DeepSeek is obviously able to offer models at a way lower cost, but still there, even if you reason 50 to 100 iterations, it's 50 to 100 times more expensive than just one iteration.
So your actually your productivity gain in terms of cost, what you want, you're eroding it because of that.
Yeah. Indeed. Compute cost has a cost, right? I mean, it consumes electricity, it consumes compute time, so these machines have limited compute time, right? So they have a cost. So you want to be a bit more cost efficient. And if you want to analyze everything in detail, you need to find that balance. And if these models can find that balance automatically, that's when we reach the next step. Because
but so that also means that you're already actually agreeing with the fact that the reasoning part will be solved, or is solved
will
already.
Be solved. It's not solved yet. Honestly, I experimented with it a lot, but I don't see a lot of gains, because we can structure a bit the process of finding this needle in the haystack, and we don't need that much reasoning. We just have standard checks built in, like, is this hallucinated, or does it
which
really
is a lot more efficient than having the model think uncontrollably almost.
Indeed. Yeah. So because we have a niche, we can build in a lot of stuff, but that's why we don't use it, because we don't get any advantage. Even for the difficult cases, it usually doesn't find that solution. But you will see that over time, it becomes more and more generally applicable, where you can just say, okay, maybe in this case, you reason a bit longer.
So what you're saying is, basically how we describe it is, you have the T profile, you have the top, the breadth, which is the amount of skills, which is an LLM is extremely good at everything. Not extremely good, but knows about everything. And then you have the depth, which is at this point not so deep yet. And most things it's not that good. We are expecting is that it will get gradually better. It's not going to be extremely fast, but gradually.
Yeah.
Do you see the same thing? And so that means that you're expecting that reasoning in the next years will just keep on improving. And at some point, it will be extremely good.
the thing with reasoning is it's like well, it's not free, but it's close to a free lunch in the sense that you have a trained model. You have scraped the whole internet, but you can make it smarter by letting it think a bit longer. So it's an easy way to go from a model that you have to get better performance from it. So I'm very sure that that's going to be a focus of many of these companies, because it's cheaper than retraining an entirely new model. So training GPT-5 will be more expensive than making GPT-4o reason. So you will definitely see that going forward. And yes, I think you will then go a slightly bit deeper, but in every case, if the context, the frame of reference is missing, you will not get there. And
you need to onboard it still.
Yeah, you still need to set the frame of reference right, provide all the context to get the end result that you want.
But the way I look at it is like, if you have a collection of data, you have the collection of all the data which is online and which is accessible for anyone.
Yeah.
And then you have a layer which is in companies or in heads of people, which is inaccessible. And that's the part you need to get in there, which is the onboarding stuff.
Yeah, and it's often in heads of people. It's not always even documented in SharePoint or whatever companies use. And that's definitely the hard part. And
would you agree that on the long term, let's say, without saying horizon, but 10 years maybe, if you get at the point that you get AI to understand that it needs to find that information, that layer which is inaccessible, and it has access to people because it can talk to us.
Yeah.
If we can figure that out, that it can start to learn, really understand where to find information and become the autonomous.
It will improve, and I'm pretty sure that many tasks can be automated like that. But tasks that really require expertise, that's much harder to get by. Especially if, pointing back to our case, if you, as a lawyer, you need to understand your customer's needs, your customer's appetite for risk, those kind of things. You can query that and they might write something, but
what's your risk appetite?
Yeah, and doesn't give you the answer that you really need to figure that out, right? So there's still a lot of stuff that's gonna stay off the radar for these models, and I like to make always the comparison with databases back in the day, right? Salesforce is just a front end on top of a database, a wrapper around MySQL or whatever database that you want to use. But if you look at Salesforce and its competitors like HubSpot, they're very successful companies because they make your lives a lot easier. They build a lot of stuff around that fits into your...
I don't want the database, I want my workflow.
Well, there you go. Yeah. And that really fits into your workflow as a salesperson, as a marketeer. And I'm pretty sure that for startups that are working now on solutions wrappers around ChatGPT, basically, that the difference is really focusing on that niche and creating that workflow around that. And that is something that I'm very sure that is not going away.
So the idea of the autonomous company is not something that you...
No, but I will see that more tasks will be automated. If I look at myself, I'm not the best developer. I'm not super efficient at writing code, especially if it's outside AI stuff. The AI stuff, that's easy, right? That comes natural, but everything boilerplate code around it, it's not my best thing. DevOps is also not the thing that I'm really good at. But now with ChatGPT, the things that I can do in just a few days compared to without ChatGPT, Googling for days, that difference is huge. So it makes me as a developer way more efficient. There are things that I can do today that I couldn't do 2 years ago. And the amount of code that I was able to contribute to this startup myself is way more than I would have been able to a few years ago. And I would need like 3 times as many people to get the same result. I see the efficiency gains are really there for people who figure out how to use tools like that to their advantage. So I don't think there will be no people companies, but there will be companies that have a lot more revenue with fewer people. But again, a lot of revenue with fewer people puts pressure on other players trying to do the same, and that just brings the cost down in general. So in the beginning, there will be a lot of revenue, but in the end, you will see that other players come up with a very similar approach, and you start cost cutting on all sides, and it levels the playing field again, and you come up with more value for less money.
So basically, it's something I've read. I'm forgot to write it, but the era of abundance, basically, because that would mean now if for a private person having a lawyer to review their electricity contract, that's not something you easily do.
No.
But in a few years, it will be maybe a few euros, and you'll just have that done.
Yeah, for sure. And well, actually, you can already upload your contract to ChatGPT. The problem is you don't know what questions to ask it, right?
And you don't know if you can trust it because it's still very broad and it's not...
Yeah, indeed. So if you have then a startup that's focused on consumer contracts to analyze them and knows what questions to ask and set the right frame of reference, well, you just upload it and you get an output instantly. So it's these kind of wrappers that I think will really make a difference in the future.
And because that's an interesting... Is that also the future for Europe? As in, we don't have any LLM player which is significant. Okay, we have Mistral and Aleph Alpha and Silo, which are worth mentioning.
Alpha, they pivoted already.
Yeah,
so.
They don't... Exactly, they pivoted. Mistral is... They're doing great, but they're not... They're still running behind. I'm not sure if they will catch up.
My experience is you pay premium model price and you get cheap model performance. That's my experience, which is sad. Like, I was so happy when they launched. I jumped on it. They're well, for me, they're doing all the right things, but the price performance, they're not there.
They don't have the scale.
Yeah, and scale or expertise, I don't know. I cannot say. If you look at what DeepSeek is able to do, okay,
fair point.
The 6 million, well, there's lots of stuff not included in that number. Good marketing, but still, they were able to do it way cheaper and probably on outdated hardware. So it is possible to do it cheaper. If they can do it, somebody else should also be able to do it.
Yeah, I think the problem, for how I see it, of course, I need to be a bit humble, not too arrogant, but what I'm seeing is that it's like when you're running a marathon or any running competition, if you don't know where the finish is, you need to always follow the one which is in front of you. And in their case, they need to determine their finish so they can like use the slipstream, but then catch up. But I have the feeling that they don't have said, that's our finish, that's our North Star, that's our goal. They're like, oh, OpenAI is doing that. Oh, let's do that as well.
Yeah, indeed.
Which is hard to catch up then.
And especially in Europe, we are, there are much fewer entrepreneurs, innovators in Europe than everywhere else, because our culture is fairly different. Like if you go to Silicon Valley, making mistakes is applauded, right? Because that's a learning opportunity. In Europe, and most European countries are very similar in that regard, is that if you make a mistake, you are, well, if it's too public, people don't look at you anymore.
Yeah.
And that's changing in the niche that we're in, right? In the environments that we're in as entrepreneurs, because we learn from each other that making those mistakes is what you need to do to be a good entrepreneur. But in our general culture, I don't see that being that present. And then if you compare that to the Chinese approach, where basically you launch something new. Let's say you launch a new smartwatch. It's on the shelves today. The same day your competitor bought it, opened it, analyzed it, and starts copying it. And all your competitors do it. And if you're the first to be able to copy it and add your own improvements on top, you have the lead again. In Europe, you're protected with patents. Software patents are obviously a bit less a case. That's why I think software innovation is faster. But all other style of patents are still there. And they safeguard you for 10 to 20, whatever years from a competitor doing something similar. So you don't have this push as much to innovate or die. And
I think we're just broader than the failing part. We're just more risk averse.
yeah, indeed.
We prefer
But
to
the reason,
settle, basically.
yeah, but the reason that we're risk averse is because if you make a mistake, you're not applauded for it.
Well, the thing is, I'm not. I find that a difficult. I'm not entirely. It's not. You should not be applauded for risk for making a mistake. I think you should be applauded for trying. It's very different.
Yeah.
And
Okay, but
yeah, because well, I find it important because I often like the failing forward. It's not about failing; it's about trying.
Yeah.
And it's fine if it then doesn't work out, but at least you gave everything to try. And I think that's what we're missing is like we're not pushing people to try things, and if it fails, fine. But you go 100%, and the result is that now we have people who try sometimes, but they don't even go 100% because they want to have like or a job on the side or anything else on the side in case it fails. But you're just already sawing one leg of your chair because of that, which is absurd.
But for me, from what I see around myself, is that if you then fail, people tend to say, "I told you so."
Yeah,
right.
But that's also something,
and that's a cultural thing that we have a lot.
I think we have a hidden group of people who would want to be it and don't dare, and then like to say, "I told you so," just to confirm their ideas. I shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
But that's the culture thing is a whole different debate. But then maybe a final thing on the Europe and LLMs. Do you actually think even if we could solve that culture, big if, but the big if, why am I allowing it to say? Because I do think there's a bit of a vibe change in AI. Because of Macron, because of Ursula von der Leyen, they are bringing out more of like, let's do it. We still have to see if all their talk will turn into action. But at least there's a vibe change. It goes from regulation to more focus on innovation. Again, let's keep being critical and see whatever actually comes out of it. Yeah. But we need to start there. So let's be positive and say the vibe change will materialize. Does it even make sense to invest in LLMs? Because there's also an argument that says it's already commoditizing. If you're investing there, maybe you're just wasting money and time.
I think we need the expertise in Europe.
So it's more a sovereignty question then.
Yeah, in this case, I think so. And it's not because Mistral is lagging behind on having the best LLM out there. The fact that we have this expertise in Europe,
if Trump goes crazy, that we can stay. Yeah. We have the
indeed, we have something, and that expertise translates in many other things. Like the more people understand how LLMs are built under the hood, the more you have a spread around it on how to apply these LLMs the right way. And by not investing in
So you're saying that knowledge spreads then, and that helps everyone again move faster.
That helps everyone again. So it's more than just having a European LLM. It's just having European expertise on LLMs. That's really, really crucial.
And I agree to a certain extent. Personally, I do actually think there's a way to beat it, because we just need to see where we'll put our finish. And I think what DeepSeek has shown is that you can choose your own finish by saying, let's do it differently. Let's find ways to do it a lot more efficiently, or even challenge the transformer architecture, if you will, because that's something which I'm not seeing doing anyone. Basically, there are
a few players, but they're not super successful now.
Let me put it differently. I still have the impression that the way we see as in if we want to be in the LLM game, it's by doing what they've done and then trying to be faster at it, which I don't believe will happen.
Well, it's just being a copycat, right? And yes,
but I do think, and that's basically the question is, but I do think there's a path where the true ambition would be, let's try to change actually already their status quo and see how we can really change that.
Yeah. I think, another cultural issue that we have is we tend to think more on technology. Can we build the best car, right? Mercedes, Porsche, whatever. We tend to focus really hard on the technology, and then the sales will follow. in the case of LLMs, okay, we don't have the best technology, but we're focusing on the best technology. But we're not focusing on where does this technology can bring value to customers.
Coming back to the application layer then.
Yeah,
basically.
indeed. And it doesn't need to be the application layer. Even if you look at, and that's something, well, that we use a lot, right, is the structured outputs. So you can now have an LLM from OpenAI and just say, return a JSON in this specific format and only this format. Super practical to include it in code. They were one of the first to launch it. It took Anthropic a very long time before they had an equivalent that comes close, but isn't really matching it. And then Mistral launched it, I think, yesterday, that they now also have these structured outputs. And you see that obviously they're lagging behind, where OpenAI is, yes, they are no longer the cutting edge of LLMs, right? Anthropic has passed them by on most cases.
Grok on the base models as well.
Yeah, but they have this focus on what does our customer want? How can we give the value to our customers?
And a very strong marketing and sales.
Yes, and that's how they can differentiate, and that's something that we in Europe tend to do a lot worse.
So they focus first on basically distribution, making sure that they get it sold rather than. But there's a tipping point. They needed the best technology to get running, but now they're harvesting it basically in the right way. But I would argue that without having the best technology first, they would not be harvesting.
No, indeed. I mean, and it started off as an open research thing, and they would release everything open source. Very nice in the beginning, but nowadays, obviously, it's more closed AI. But yes, they had to have that baseline, and that was a gamble for many of the investors putting money into it. And then just one way or another, some guy figured out how to take that technology and turn that into a marketable product. But you see that they really made the switch from a research company to a product company.
Yeah, and I think if you use ChatGPT, you feel that. Like they're still using the same base model as months ago, but you feel it improving just in the way they have it work.
Yeah.
And because the base model, but you see like the quality of the tables, it's a lot better than a few months ago.
Indeed.
The structure of the conversation, the verbosity, it's all improving. And the base model is actually the same thing.
And base model is the same thing. They just fine tune it a bit differently. They change their super prompt on top of it, right? A bit more. And you see less of this evolution with the other players. They just come out with like Anthropic. For us, they're ideal. I mean, we can use them in our code base, but if you use their chat interface, I use them for difficult questions because they give a better answer. But in general, the answers that ChatGPT gives are more snackable. They're easier to process, easier to work with. So the default that I use is still ChatGPT for most of the things, unless it's very difficult, and then I switch to Anthropic. And
so what you're saying is in Europe, we have the tendency to also focus too much on that technology side, and not on the people or businesses that
indeed, because we think that we think that we can make a difference by making a technological leap forward. And that's what we copy from OpenAI. But what we often miss is the nitty-gritty details that turn a customer that says this is okay into a customer that says this is awesome. That fine-grained difference, that's where we lack. And that's, if you look at the startups that end up being successful, in 99% of the cases, those are the companies that focus on this last mile, this last edge to where to make a difference.
Yeah. So, and on that one, is there anything like, how do you see this maybe as a final question? You're saying the autonomous company, okay, less people. So probably it will evolve in fewer and fewer people, not at a point where no people, but just fewer people to generate more value. I saw Satya Nadella gave an interview, was it this week or last week, where he, like, the question is on AGI, and he basically said, like, yeah, if we see 10% of productivity gain, that will be, then we can be talking about something like AGI. how do you think about it? Is that what we should look at for the world to move towards?
Well, whether we like it or not, we're moving towards AGI.
So that's something
everybody is working on that because we just want models that are smarter and smarter. So we're moving into that direction. But what I think we shouldn't forget that is we still have a human-based economy in the sense that nothing gets produced if it doesn't create value for a human. In the end, it's always something for a consumer, right? And you have lots of B2B companies, but the end result is consumer value. And as long as we are the customers, AI is just going to be a tool to create value for that customer. And you'll have multiple companies competing with each other to, well, create more value for less money. And that's something that's not going to change with AGI. But I'm very sure that we're moving into that direction. And I have to admit, like, the point where we reach that AI can improve itself faster than we can understand what it's doing is a very scary moment. And the thing that we should be aware of is what are the goals that we give this AGI to achieve? There is this famous paperclip example, right, where they say, okay,
people making
paperclips, and if that's your goal, well, you don't say that you cannot use human bones to make paperclips, right? So it is really important that we really think about the goals that we set for an AI, and that this is the part where we can always pull the plug is on the goal. The AGI.
So the Ilya Sutskever mission on being fully aligned or a super safe AI, that's something you think, or you don't see it as big. You see it as how do we do it?
Well, I think the only way out is to open source everything, because we need all eyes that we can get on this. The more we stick
we need a real open AI.
We need a proper open AI. And yes, it's nice that the weights are shared by DeepSeek and that Meta shares the weights, but the training data and all that stuff is not open. And we all know they just learn the training data. Okay, there's some fine tuning, but even there, they learn based on that data. And if you don't have that data, it's not fully open source. You can't really figure out what's really happening under the hood. And the only way for us to build safe AI is to have enough eyeballs on the technology. So I'm very happy that some players like Mistral, DeepSeek, and Meta are releasing the weights, but we should do a lot more. And that's the only way where we can guarantee that whatever we build is gonna be safe, because people need to know what's happening. We need to be able to democratize AI, because, well, if you try DeepSeek, for example, you ask about the students on the Tiananmen Square, right? It will say, well, let's talk about something else, because there is a moral bias in that model. OpenAI has also these moral biases, because if you say, how do I buy an unlicensed gun, it will not answer it.
Yeah, I agree. The thing is, I don't believe in I'm not a fan of too much. I understand the importance of regulations. I don't think we should try and regulate everything, because that simply doesn't work. But I do think there's only one way which move forward, is having as many companies or people working on it, because in the end, you can even see it as in the bad actors will also do it. And it's only if there's enough good actors capable of balancing it that will end up in a positive scenario.
That's the only way out. And that's another reason why a company like Mistral should be supported in Europe. Yes, they should open source more. That's my opinion. But having them in Europe makes a difference. And on the point of regulation, we often have the tendency in Europe to regulate something that we don't understand. And it's very clear with the AI Act, because they had to revision it a lot of times. Plus, we tend to solve problems that are not there. We have regulation in place for cases that
because we don't understand
are not realistic. And that doesn't make sense. Our regulation should be a fast responder. it should not lead ahead.
Yeah, they should change the whole process.
Yeah,
basically.
indeed. And they tried that with the AI Act really for the first time to be ahead of the curve, but it doesn't work.
But I don't think they need to be ahead of the curve.
No.
I think they need to change the process in which they can adapt quickly, but also only on things that they understand.
Yeah, because they cannot be ahead of the curve because they don't know where the curve is going.
Exactly.
And that's the problem.
And on that one, I think we're going trying to wrap this up a bit. So you've went through the cycle of understanding your niche. You found your niche. You really understand your niche. Really excited to see you moving forward there, actually. And then you're feeling pretty secure in terms of how will the LLMs improve. And in Europe, we need more initiatives to make sure that there's not enough knowledge in the market.
Definitely. We definitely need that. Yes.
Thank you, Pieter. It was very interesting.
Thank you, Davio.